Okay, I welcome everybody to the second knowledge exchange event on grassland management within the knowledge exchange week of the projects Climate Farm Demo and Climate Smart Advisor. This webinar is, as always, recorded and will be available later on the YouTube channel of the projects. My name is Siw Fasting. I remember to tell you that as well. I work for the Grassland Center in Northern Germany, and I'm very happy to welcome a lot of people to discuss grassland management with Kilian Obermeier today. Before we start, we want to get a small overview of who's in the room, who's going to discuss with us today. So please open a new browser or your cell phone and join the Menti quiz. I will open the question in a second. Sorry, there are lots of notes coming in from different people. So, okay. The first question is, where are you from? Just to see who's in the room, who's participating today. Okay, from France, Ireland, United Kingdom, Germany, 2, 3, Austria. Okay, nobody from the south, Spain, Italy, or from the east, Poland, Czech, Hungary. Okay. So Ireland, United Kingdom, Northern France, Austria. Okay. Next question is, how deeply are you involved in grassland management? In your current work, in your daily life, on your weekends, whenever. Okay. So most of the people are quite involved with grassland management. That's good. You're at the right webinar then. For the ones who are not that involved with grassland management, maybe you get involved right now. That would be amazing. And the next question is, which of these roles do you identify most with? To kind of get an overview, who's in the room, who are we speaking to? Okay, Climate Smart Advisor, Climate Smart Coaches, so from Climate Smart Advisor project, I guess, Climate Farm Advisor as well, Research, Advisory Service. Okay, no farmers in the room? Maybe some have some double roles. Okay. Okay, interesting. So lots of people who are actually actively working with farmers, but no farmers in the room. So you can report what we're discussing today to the farmers you're working with. Next question is, has the grassland on your farm in your area changed in recent years due to environmental changes? Yes, no, I can't really say. Okay, no changes. Maybe it's interesting to discuss that later, where there are changes and where not, but let's leave that to the end. And then if you feel there are changes, or maybe not, how would the grassland on your farm in your area change over the next 20 years? What do you think? Just write a word or several words to kind of collect what is happening in the next 20 years. Droughts, okay. Less yield. New weeds, yeah, greater diversity. Introduction, increase in herbal layers, climate resilience. Okay, so you're already addressing some things you want to do in the next 20 years. Less quality, yeah. Maybe we'll find a solution for these challenges together. Okay. Well, if you have more things you want to add to this slide, I will just leave it open. But for now, we'll stop sharing and then give over the microphone to Kilian Obermeier. Thank you very much that you're joining this webinar today and that you're presenting us your insights on the topic.
Yeah, hi from Baden-Württemberg. So my name is Kilian Obermeier, and I work for the LAZBW. So that's a farm pretty much run by the government, and it's mainly for educational purposes. So we teach young farmers, and we do some applied research concerning mainly dairy cattle and grassland. So this is what I mainly do, and today I would like to show you some ideas on what could happen, what will happen with the grassland in the next years, and what we can do about it. And it's obviously a huge topic and nothing you can deal with in an hour or something. You have to spend probably a day or two on it. But I will try to give you some spotlights and try to share my slides now. So I don't know how to deal with questions if we answer them during the presentation or afterwards. So I don't mind.
Or maybe just either put your questions into the chat or raise your hand and we will discuss them.
So I won't see the hands, I think, but you can tell me. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will take care.
Grassland in a changing climate. That's the topic of today. And okay, it's a bit slow, I think. Oh, okay. You all know the global climate scenarios, I think, from the IPCC. And when looking at the political situation internationally and in Europe and in Germany, it's not looking overly good for these scenarios. So we would like to stay in the SSP 2.6 or actually 1.9, but at the moment we are facing 7 or 8.5. So if we do not change something, it will be a bit warmer in the next years. And what will happen to the grassland or to agriculture is one of the big concerns because we are highly dependent on the climate, on the weather. And there is a lot of modeling obviously going on. So we try to understand what will happen in the future. And this is one modeling approach I would like to show you that deals specifically with grassland, which is rare. Most is about arable crops, the modeling. And overall, we know that the CO2 concentrations are rising in the atmosphere because we still use a lot of fossil fuels. And that's at the first look, that's good for the plants because there's more CO2, more photosynthesis. The plants are more efficient in photosynthesis. And so there might be a higher net primary production. So there will be more higher yields in grassland on the first glance. This will be more pronounced because of phenological shifts, because there's an earlier onset of vegetation, a longer growing season. So the spring will start earlier, autumn will last longer, so winter will be shorter. And this also means we have a higher potential for a carbon sink when looking at grassland, because there's more production. That means it's also a higher sink. Up to a certain point, when it's getting really warm, the grassland will turn back to a carbon source, and that's all the perfect scenario. So what we don't know or what might happen, especially when we look at certain areas, is that the precipitation will shift. So we will have less precipitation or very unevenly distributed precipitation. And this might overlay all those growing or yield fostering effects of CO2, for example. And the other big factor in this is that the interannual variability is really strong. So one year will not be like another. We experience that right now here in Germany because this year was really wet. So we had a lot of precipitation and we had a few quite dry years comparably. And this makes it really hard to plan and to work on systems which are constant. So we have to be really flexible with our management decisions. A bit about Baden-Württemberg. So where I'm from, that's in southern Germany. It's not Bavaria, it's the other part of southern Germany. And the climate is, we have cool winters, warm summers, quite warm summers. So we have no explicit dry or wet season, but quite regional differences in precipitation temperature. The grassland is obviously C3 plants, so it's temperate grassland. We have grasses, herbs, legumes, as you probably all know it. And we have pretty much two major systems. We have a quite intensive system for herbage production to feed dairy cows with high yields. And this is mostly cut grassland for silage. The other part is a more extensive grassland where the main goal is to retain it, to prevent succession of shrubs, for example, because it's high value grassland. It's usually grazed or cut or both, and has much lower yields and less feed quality. So it's two types of major grassland scenarios in Baden-Württemberg. And we also experience climate change. So that's temperature anomalies recorded by the German weather services. Starting at early industrial age up to now. And what you can see here is the blue bars and the red bars. And the blue bars means the temperature is colder or cooler than usual. And the red bars means it's warmer than usual. And you can see, I think it's quite clear that the red bars are dominating the last 10 or 20 years. So it's getting warmer indeed. Which is not a big problem at the first glance, but that will be getting much warmer in the future. So that's also a modeling approach, and you can see that far future, so 2070 onwards, will be really warm, and also the number of hot days, so warmer than 30 degrees, will also increase, and that's a problem, obviously, also for the grassland. Similar, or not similar, but the same modeling approach is precipitation. And you can see that the winter precipitation, so that's the left panel, will increase. So we will have more precipitation in winter, more rain. And we can also expect that we will carry some of this moisture in the soil into the spring, so into the growing season, which will give us a good spring season. But we also can see that precipitation in summer will be less. So we have the same amount of precipitation looking at a whole year, or it might be even more, but the distribution is shifting towards winter. And obviously plants are not growing well in winter. So that's a problem. And back to Europe. There's a similar projection for Europe, so there is less soil moisture in near and far future in the soils, irrespective of the scenario of the climate scenario. But there will be more drought in the scenarios looking at higher temperatures, obviously. But even if we start to do something against emissions and try to prevent a further climate change, there will be still more droughts in Europe because we already have a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. If you're interested, you can look at the European Drought Observatory site. That's a Copernicus project, and there's also a warning system integrated, so it will give you for the near future a scenario what will happen in your region. So that's quite interesting, I think. And they have a lot of publications on future projections, but yeah, it's not so nice to read. It's a heavy topic somehow. It's not only climate change which leads to droughts, it's also land use. And obviously, land sealing is a big problem. So building roads, cities, towns, whatever seals the soil is not good because water cannot infiltrate there. So the water will run off and will not be plant available. And what we have in Germany, and I think in many other countries of Europe as well, is a small scale drainage system. So we are really good in running the water off our agricultural soils very quick. So it will run into drains, onto roads, and in the end into rivers, which is not helping us for production. So this is especially a problem when we are looking at heavy precipitation, which will be case in the future more often, because a lot of water will not be infiltrating in the soil and run off. So it's not soil available, not plant available. Another topic is soil compaction. I think when you look at arable fields, farmers are quite aware and try to work against it. But in grassland management, at least in Germany, the machinery is getting bigger and bigger and more, and it's really heavy. Especially slurry spreading is a big problem, and soil compaction in grassland will also decrease the ability of water infiltration. So that's the other side of drought somehow. What does that mean for the grassland? So we have sufficient winter precipitation. That is obviously not true for all Europe, but for our case here in southern Germany. We have more droughts in summer. We have extreme weather. So this is the hot days or the heavy precipitation. We have a high variations inter-year. So no year will be like the one before or the next one. Winter is shorter, less cold periods, less frost. And we have, that's the other side, earlier start of spring and the later end of autumn. And this results in multiple consequences for grassland and pastures. So there will be a change in botanical composition if we like it or not, because our grassland, especially our intensively used grassland, is relying on perennial ryegrass, which is not working well in dry conditions. And we can try to change botanical composition with management. So then it's targeted, or it will change on its own because some plants will adapt better to the new conditions. There will be decreasing dry matter yields because of drought. There will be gaps in sward because some plants will die during the drought. Unwanted species like weeds will infest those gaps. And what that's probably or might be a specific southern German problem, this fast warming of the gaps, that's ideal conditions for some pests like it's in German it's called the Junikäfer, June beetle. And the larvae of those, they are really destructive to the sward. So it's kind of a indirect problem to the drought. What can we do? So first thing is keep the grassland in good condition. So that's absolutely basic, and most farmers do that, I hope. Retain soil organic matter if you can. So we will lose soil organic matter with strongly rising temperatures, as I said. So try to store carbon in the soil. Try to retain healthy soil. So again, carbon is important. Try to avoid compactions. Look at your fertilization to have sufficient nutrients. Adapted plant communities for specific sites might help. So targeted shift into a more climate or drought tolerant species composition. And those points are relevant for climate protection as well. So it's not only adaptation, it's also protection because of the carbon in the soil, because of healthy soils. What are the direct measures? Adjust and adapt fertilization and utilization. So a lot of utilization, intensive cutting, mowing, grazing means you also need a lot of fertilization and the other way around. But you always have to keep in mind what your soil and your climate at a specific field can do. So that there are obviously boundaries. Avoid loss of soil organic matters, avoid soil compactions, and avoid grassland renovation. And that's another, I think, really important point, because we will always lose a lot of soil carbon when we plow or grassland, so for renovation. And this is not good, obviously. That's not good for the soil, it's not good for the climate. And the main reasoning behind grassland renovation is sward improvement. And often it will not become any better because the seeds of the weeds you try to kill with the grassland renovation are in the soil, and usually it's a problem with the general grassland management. So grassland renovation is a no-go in Germany. I think we are pretty good with it right now, and do not plow a lot of grassland. And now, but a bit into the sward. So what will happen, or how can plants cope with drought? So on this graph on the right-hand side, you can see what happens, how the drought proceeds. So we have a before the drought, so it's still the soil is wet, there's enough moisture, there's a moderate drought, a severe drought, and then after the drought, when the rain comes back. And on the y-axis, you can see the plant reaction. So at first, it's resistance, then there's a growth stop, and then there's just survival. There are plants which just escape drought, but they are obviously not very interesting for agriculture production because they will not grow in a drought scenario. Other plants try to deal with it. They try to avoid dehydration, so keep enough water in the plant system, basically use more water from the soil, lose less water to the atmosphere. But this will only work up to a certain point. When it becomes really dry, the plants start to tolerate dehydration because they just dehydrate, and they try to reduce the water, their water need. So that means no more growth, obviously, so less biomass which needs water, then less or the senescence of leaves, so they lose leaves, again less tissue which needs to be which has a water need. And the next step would be dormancy, so the absolute death of the plant, except some organs, usually close to the roots, which will then be able to regrow after the drought. So a fast regrowth after the drought is another strategy. This means when a summer drought happens, we have low or no growth in this time. The overall yield decreases, and you can see those growth rates. So that's kg dry matter per hectare and day growth and at our farm. And the black one is an average from 2007 to 2023. And the green one was 2018. And you can see from July on, there was absolutely no growth because it was a severe drought. 2019 was also a quite dry year. Also not much growth there. What we expect, that's the graph on the right-hand side. The green line, that's the growth rate which we are used to. So strong growth in spring, some growth in summer, and a bit more in autumn. And what will change now, we expect an earlier start. We have a really strong spring growth because it's warm, it's a lot of water there, but then there's almost no growth in summer. So that's the drought. And we also can expect a longer period in autumn. This is a bit of a problem because it's really hard to make good silage in autumn because of the short days and often wet soil conditions. So grazing is an option there for farms that do not graze. So I would like to show you again some plant reactions on drought. That's from a study from a Swiss study. They did a rainout shelter trial where they retain precipitation from one part of the experiment, and the other part gets the normal precipitation. And you can see that in this rainout shelter time there was only 36 millimeters of precipitation versus 220 millimeters. So it's a big difference from June to August. And they tested the difference in biomass at the end of the drought. So ryegrass was really bad when it was dry. So compared to with precipitation, chicory was also quite not much growth there, and white and red clover was a bit better. I will tell you one possible reason why in a second. But the interesting part is then after the precipitation comes back, so 6 weeks after this simulated drought. Ryegrass and chicory have much higher yields in the when they experience drought compared to the plants that had precipitation all the time, and that's a compensation mechanism. So that's one good thing. So we will harvest quite a lot after the drought, and there was not much change and not much difference in white clover and red clover, similarly to the time during the drought. Resource exploitation of plants is one possibility to cope with with drought, and you can see that's really old paintings or drawings from Kutschera from the 1950s, but they're really nice, I think. And you have some grasses with a deep rooting system like Dactylus glomerata, so that's orchid grass, I think, in English, and you have Festuca species which are also quite deep rooting, and the English ryegrass is quite shallow rooting. Similarly, the Kentucky bluegrass. This means grasses or plants in general with a deeper rooting system have more resources available, so more water, more nutrition, and have some advantages when it's dry. And you can see even more extreme examples like Festuca, that's tall fescue in English, I think, like a really deep rooting grass, and alfalfa as probably the example for deep rooting grassland plant. The problem is if you have only deep rooting plants, that might lead to water stress as well, because they're all deep rooting now and all exploiting deep soil layers. So if you mix different species with different rooting systems, that might be a good idea. And again, you can see those species in another experiment, which shows again the difference in growth. And you can see that Lolium perennis, so English ryegrass, when there's enough water, there's much more yield than in dry conditions. Then Poa pratensis, so Kentucky bluegrass, the difference is not that big, but still quite visible. The difference in orchid grass is then not so significant. And Festuca pratensis, so a fescue species, this difference is quite small. So it's just a big difference in species, how they deal with drought. And the problem is now, we know that those species work quite well in dry conditions, but some of them are just not of really high quality feed if you compare to English ryegrass or clovers. And other species like red clover or alfalfa are hard to establish in permanent grassland, especially under intensive management. So that's a bit of a problem. And now a bit of a closer look to grass species for permanent grassland that might work. So tall fescue will maximize water uptake. It has a really deep rooting system, and the interesting part is it works also really well in very wet conditions. So when we are talking about re-wetting peatland, tall fescue is one option. So it works in every condition pretty much. There's already some breeding. We have softleaf varieties which are better suited for feeding cattle than the normal festuca, because the non-improved festuca is really hard. The morphology is not very suitable for feeding cattle. It's not so easy to establish. You need quite high soil temperatures and a really careful first utilization. And it's a bit, perennial ryegrass will push it out of your sward because it's just growing much faster in the beginning. So it's hard to establish it in existing ryegrass swards. On the other hand, orchid grass or Dactylus has another strategy. It's also quite deep rooting, not as deep as Festuca. And it reduces the water loss mainly by closing the stomata. And it's also a bit of a problem with the feed quality. It's not as good as perennial ryegrass, but there are internationally enough systems which produce well with cattle on orchid grass or also tall fescue. So that will work. It's not as good as a feed as perennial ryegrass, obviously, but might be one way to deal with drought. Another really important part, I think, is the diversification of grassland communities. So it's not a good idea to just rely on one species or a few species. It's better to have many species in your grassland sward, and especially from different functional groups. So some grasses, some legumes, some herbs. And as I already told you, they will use different layers of soil for resource depletion. So they will work under different conditions. So if you have, for example, ryegrass in there, that will really work well in spring, but will not grow really well when it's getting dry, and your orchid grass will grow later on much better. On the right-hand side, you can see such an improved sward. There's also chicory in there and plantain and some other herbs and I think different clovers. So that's one possibility, but the problem with some of these species are they are not really persistent against intensive utilization. So they will not last forever in your sward, and you have to reseed them after a while. The benefit of such diverse swards is the over yielding, and you can see that on this graph at the bottom. You can see the yield of different species grown as a monoculture. So there is again perennial ryegrass, then timothy and red clover, white clover, chicory and plantain. And it's again grown with precipitation and grown with drought. And you can see all species grow better when there's water. So that's not a big surprise, but some species do better under dry conditions. Now, if you take the average of those species, you have this yield in the middle. So there is, again, a significant difference between dry and wet conditions. And then in this experiment, they used also a perennial ryegrass with really high nitrogen fertilization. So twice as much nitrogen fertilization, just as a bit of a other possibility to push your yields. And you can see this yield is really good. It's better than the average of those other species grown with only 150 kg of nitrogen per hectare. But then the mixture of all species will perform better with 150 kg of nitrogen than the perennial ryegrass with 300 kg of nitrogen. So there's a strong effect of this mixture. That's what you call transgressive overyielding. Then, if the mixture exceeds the best performing single species. So mixtures are probably a good thing, and usually grassland is already a mixture of species, but again, we can push that a bit in a direction where we want it. So now we have our grassland and it's dry, and what do you do? So there's some sward height, there's some yield on your field, and now is always the big question: is it better to harvest or graze it, or to wait, to leave it there standing? So what we know, the feed quality will definitely become worse, so decreasing feed quality. Also, the feed quantity will decrease because the plants will have dying leaves to decrease their tissue, which needs water. So that's one mechanism, as I told you. And we all usually have feed shortages in dry conditions. So that all means, harvest. But on the other hand, we have microclimate, we have shading of soil if the sward is retained. So we could keep some water in the system. But I think, bottom line is that you should harvest because you need the feed and it will not become any better. On the other hand, no stress for the plants, which is not absolutely necessary. So no slurry application, no harrowing. Just wait with those measures, with this management for the rain, because it's just stressing plants that are already really stressed. And then one really important point is the cutting or grazing height, so the residual you leave after your harvest. That should be quite high. So we usually recommend a mowing height of around 6 centimeters or a grazing residual of 4 centimeters. And you should really bring that up. Grazing residuals up to 6 or 7 centimeters and cutting height pretty much as high as your mower can mow. And this is because in the base of the plant, there's a carbon storage which the plant needs for regrowth. I will give you a bit of an insight on that in a second. And the plant will still do some photosynthesis in the drought, but will not grow because there's no nitrogen and no water available. So the carbon, which is stored during the drought, will be stored in the space of the plant and then can be used for fast regrowth after the drought. So if you cut really deep, you take this storage organ off the plant. Keep your harvesting height, your cutting height high. So a bit on fertilization, but I will skip that a little bit because of the time. We have a limited nitrogen uptake during drought. That's important. It does not make any sense to fertilize plants during drought. It makes sense when it's a moderate or short drought, just to have a healthy plant. It makes it easier for the plant to deal with it. Also, atmospheric nitrogen fixation is not working really well when it's getting dry. In a severe drought, it's not working at all. So the clover advantage will only last into a moderate drought. But the other side, and that's also one part why plants will regrow really strong after a drought, is the nitrogen availability after the drought. So rewetting means also mineralization of nitrogen. So there's a nitrate and the plants can take that up. And plants, that's another reason why plants overcompensate after a drought. So it's this storage organ, the carbon, and on the other hand, the nitrogen availability. So that's again, after the drought, what can we see on the plants? So we see that the root biomass is much higher when plants experience drought. So that doesn't matter for which plant. So that's one, that's something you can see directly how the plant deals with water stress, forms more roots to have a better water resource availability. And the other part I already showed you is the change in water-soluble carbohydrates in the base layer. So this reserved for fast regrowth. After the drought, precipitation and nitrogen mineralization, the carbon in the plant storage, and there will be a recovery of the sward. Also perennial ryegrasses, which really looks sometimes horrible during or after drought, will recover up to a certain point, but there will always be areas with patches without recovery, and there will be weed. And we don't want that, obviously, because we want a good sward to produce a high quality and high quantity feed. So we should close those gaps with reseeding. And that's always a bit difficult because usually then it's getting autumn, the days are getting shorter, and it's getting colder, so it's not ideal to reseed. We need a few insights how that works. So there's a lot of starch not a lot of starch in the grass seed, but there's some starch in the grass seed, and it will swell when it's getting wet. So you need water. There's a phytochrome system for the development of the embryo of the plant. So you need light. That means a long day, and especially you should never bury your seeds. So really a shallow seeding depth. The intensity and duration is so you need temperature for a fast development, light and temperature, and there needs to be quite high temperatures especially for ryegrass for fast development. So resulting from that, you need water for germination process and the total development of the young seedling. You need light and you need high soil temperatures, so it's a bit of a problem in the autumn. So you have to try to guess if there's enough time in autumn to reseed or wait until spring to reseed there. There were two questions, I think, in the chat, or there was something in the chat at least.
Sorry, no, I think it's just an automated info about
good
AI note taker.
Okay. Then something about pasture management in changing climate. I think that's particularly important because if you cut silage, you have your silage stack and you can just keep on feeding during drought. If you are grazing your cows and there's a drought, you have a problem because there's no feed availability up to a certain point. And in Germany, or especially in southern Germany, the Kurzrasenweide, so that's a really intensive continuous grazing system with really short swaths, is quite popular because it's easy to manage and you can produce a lot of milk with it. The problem is it's a short swath. It means also shallow roots. There's no rest period for plants, and only a few plants can sustain in such intensive grazing management. So it's not a really diverse swath. So what can we do? On the right-hand side, you can see this Kurzrasenweide on the upper picture when there's enough water, and it works really well. But on the bottom picture, you can see how it looks when it's getting dry, and obviously that will not produce a lot of milk. And there is obviously other grazing management systems, and generally, I think this Voisin-based approach is pretty good. André Voisin developed this in the 1950s, so it was probably the first real book about grazing management. And the ideas of this guy are still, that's what New Zealand and Ireland is pretty much doing. So they refined it a bit, but the main ideas are from the 1950s, so really old. So he defined 4 principles. That's first, the recovery period principle. So a sward needs enough time to recover before the next utilization, before the next grazing, to refill the carbon storage for fast regrowth, and to just have the chance to grow some roots and to assimilate a lot of carbon. You will harvest it at the maximum herbage growth rate, because if you harvest later, you already lose potential pretty much. So it's the maximum average herbage growth rate. Sorry about that. The next principle is the occupation principle. It's a short occupation, so there's no regrowth occurring during the grazing. because if the cows are on the paddock for longer than, let's say, 3 days, the grass will start to regrow, and then there's only one leaf on the plant, and the cow will graze that, and that's not good for the plant. I will show you in a second why. Maximum performance principle is animal demand and pasture performance match. Means high-yielding dairy cows get the best pastures, and your dry cows or your replacements, they can have not so good pastures. Regular performance means short occupation to achieve low variations in feed quality. So you have to imagine if the cows are in a paddock for 2 weeks, on the first day they will only eat the best leaves and a bit of clover, so the feed will be great. The second day still will be good feed, and if you look at day 10 and day 14, for example, there will only be the stubble. And the feed will be much, will not have the quality of the beginning, and you always want a regular feed quality for the cows. So this is in German. I was too lazy to translate that, but I think it's not hard to understand, and you have to learn some German now. And you can see a ryegrass plant here, and it works for the most plants in our grasslands the same way, or in a similar way at least. On the first picture, this plant is grazed, but was grazed recently. So there's only a small leaf regrowing, and the plant cannot do any photosynthesis. So that means all the growth of the plant will come from the storage organ in the base of the plant. When the first leaf is fully grown, the plant can do sufficient carbon assimilation for photosynthesis to grow new leaves, and also start to grow some roots, because it's assimilating more carbon than it needs. But you also can see on the bottom panel that the concentration of sugar as a proxy for the carbon storage in the plant is depleted at that point. So there's no more storage. And now if the cow will graze this plant with one leaf, there's no storage to regrow a new leaf. So that's really important to never graze really young grass plants, because that's will slow down your regrowth a lot or kill the plant. One more important part is if you have 3 leaves on the ryegrass plant, the first grown leaf will die or start to die. So there's only 3 living leaves on a plant, and so that means also it does not make any sense to harvest later. Grazing systems and residuals and sward height in droughts. So that's also a big question. We do not much research on grazing in Germany, because we are just not a grazing country like Ireland or also France. And we do not have much of our own information, so we always have to look at other countries and try to figure out what they do. And now we look more and more into countries which already deal with drought. Transpiration of soils and plants is a problem, so we always want to reduce unproductive water loss, so have a dense sward. Makes sense. Microclimate is also a big part, so dense sward and shading of the sward itself, and also a regrowth period makes also sense. Higher yields, will have higher yields with an adequate rest period, higher grazing residuals in a drought situation for faster regrowth. Stick to the rest period is really important, even if you're running low on feed. Do not graze it too early. You need to find another solution. Deferred grazing is one option we can look at for this. So just leave some paddocks in spring grow old. So that's like hay, standing hay, and you have some feed for the summer, but it's obviously low quality feed. And mob grazing is another part some people are looking into right now, but that's not really interesting for permanent grassland. It's more for arable fields, I think, in our situation at least. I will skip that, and this too, that's more about growing fodder on the arable field, stockpiling also. So what I would like to take a look at is the phenological clock. That's another Yeah, big part, what I already told you. So we will have much earlier spring, so shorter winter. And on the right-hand side, you can see on the outer circle that's the from 1960 to 1990, and the inner circle is from 1990 to 2020. So that's our situation, more or less. And what you can see there is that the the seasons start at much earlier, especially spring starts at a much earlier date, or a different date at least, when you ask plants. So that's the phenological clock is defined by certain species and the flowering or the termination of some species. And we still have winter, so vernalization is still given. Plants can still form seeds. We have an earlier snow melt, earlier temperature increase, earlier onset of vegetative growth, and earlier onset of flowering. So that means everything will be earlier, and we have to adjust our management to that. This also means that some species will perform much better, some species will not perform as well, and this means also a shift in our botanical composition. Siw, do we have still enough time, or you
Yeah,
want?
we still have 10 minutes, so
Okay, no, that's
go on.
great. Okay. So, and what that means, I would like to explain on a bit of another example. So that's on alpine grasslands. We are in the south of Germany, so close to the Alps, and there is something what we call Almwirtschaft. It's really, yeah, the main part of it is in Switzerland and Austria because they have more Alps than Germany, obviously. And it's a traditional summer grazing of alpine grassland. So it's transhumance with cattle, sheep, or goats. So you run your animals up during summer, and they can graze in the mountains. And some of them get milked, or it's just fattening or rearing of replacements. So there's an upward movement during summer. So you start at the lower parts, and when the snow melts, the herd will keep on grazing, yeah, uphill because it's colder uphill, and the season will start later. So this is a traditional system, and it's really important because this grassland in the or alpine grassland is really of high value when we are looking at biodiversity, for example. So there are unique plants, and it's also a beautiful landscape. People go there for vacation, and we would like to keep that, retain that open landscape. But obviously, in the Alps, there's climate change too, and it hits harder than in the lowlands, actually. So the warming is faster. And there's a study of from Austria, which is quite interesting on that. And it's a long-term study. They compared the 1990s to the 2010s, and they found increasing average temperatures over the whole year. They found higher temperatures during the growing season, so it's warmer during summer. The average precipitation is increased in this time, so there's more rain, but it's not during the growing season. So there's less rain during the growing season and more during winter. Rain or snow, obviously, in the Alps. And what does it mean for the grassland? At a given date, you will have a higher biomass availability. So if you compare the 1990s to today, there is at a certain date, or day of the year, more biomass. The phenology will be more developed, so it's further developed because it's just warmer at that point of time. There's more fiber because the sward is more mature, and there's less protein. So that means you need to run your cattle up much earlier, and I show you in a second how much earlier than in the 1990s, for example. And there's one advisor who is working a lot with cattle farmers who graze those systems, and he said spring feed excess will lead to feed shortage in summer. And that means if you have too much feed and the cattle will not graze that in spring, it will grow really old and is not available during summer. So you will, with too lenient, too late grazing in spring, you will have a real problem during summer. And there's one species which is a bit of a problem. It's actually a name-giving species of a plant community, which is a really nice plant community. But this grass is absolutely horrible if you look at it with the eyes of a cow, because the morphology is not really nice. It's hard to graze. The digestibility is really, really low, and the quality declines fast. So that means if you run your cattle up too late, this grass will already be will not be grazed anymore by the cows, because it's just not palatable at any means. There's no feed value in it, and that means this grass will flower, will reseed itself, and will spread. And we see this in the Black Forest in Baden-Württemberg. We see that in many parts of the Alps, and you need actually intensified grazing management to push that back. Implications for management to retain those pastures. This earlier start of growing season and phenological stages means earlier stocking of pastures. So you need to run the cattle up much earlier. And the problem is this grazing system and this Almwirtschaft is very traditional, and they often have like fixed dates to run the cattle into the mountains. And they really need to change that. So they have to be today 14 days earlier, but that will move on really fast. And looking another decade into the future, that might be 40 days. So that's a lot. And you need sufficient grazing pressure to remove the major biomass proportion, also looking at this nardus grass. Pasture management is important, so you also should do proper pasture management in the Alps. You should think about what to do if the summer drought hits in the Alps as well. So summer drought is also their problem. But there's also one study I recently read, is that this earlier begin of growing season of vegetation means also an earlier senescence of plants. So the autumn will actually be earlier with an earlier spring. So that's just one study that stated that, but it might counteract a bit against those findings. And one thing which is really important in this case, and I think that's for many conservation and extensive grasslands, semi-natural grasslands, which we would like to retain, let the cow wait for the grass, not grass for the cow. That's again the Siegfried Steinberger. And that means you need some grazing pressure, you need some intensity, you need to remove the biomass, and don't think too much about that will harm your valuable species, because it will not. There's also some studies on that already, and you need to remove the biomass to also prevent successions from shrubs. And that's it now from my side. And if there are any questions or points you like to discuss, please, let me know.
Okay, thank you very much, Lian. So far, there are no questions yet in the chat. Are there any questions in the room? Just raise your hand, or just now you can just unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, thank you for a great overview. Seems like there are lots of research gaps in this area for grassland farmers. Just a comment.
Yes, there are. So there's a lot to do on this topic. Yeah.
Okay, if there's not many questions, no questions so far, I have one question. And what do you think? How aware are farmers to these issues, and how far are they into adapting to these issues?
I think it really depends where they are. If they experienced like severe droughts repeatedly in the past, then they are aware and they would like to change. There are not many resources that they can look at how to change, what they can do, and some of the changes are really severe on your system, like establishing other grasses in your grassland is a big is a problem for many farmers. And in other areas where there was perhaps one dry season or two, and there will 2 or 3 seasons with enough precipitation, they will not be aware at all. So that's what we experience here at the moment. They really don't care about it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. If so, just unmute yourself. I just want to take one more minute and open your Menti again for the last minute. So just get some insights for the next webinar from you on what are the measures for climate adaptation and mitigation on grassland farmers in your area are implementing. Just please include your country, and these are informations we want to gather to also use for the next webinars.
There are more questions though.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't see those.
So the first one, I can see it now.
Yeah, perfect.
It's about wet weather in spring and earlier onset of grazing, and that's definitely an issue. You can try to with some wet weather management plans like on-off grazing. You can work against that, and it's not necessarily the spring will not be necessarily very wet because of it's earlier. That's something we have to look into it. But in general, you should not graze waterlogged soils. That's true because you will destroy your sward. New grasses, sorghum or Sudan grass, or there's teff, so C4 grasses, and farmers are looking into it, but I don't think that's something for permanent grassland. You can absolutely introduce that into your fodder crop rotation or something. There is potential there, but the problem with permanent grassland is, so I'm talking about northern Germany, northern Europe now. The winter is still way too cold for C4 plants, so they will not be there permanently. So we still have to stick to C3 plants. So how do you overcome the need to introduce new grassland plant species and desire to not to reseed? Yes, it's overseeding. Sorry, that's probably a technical term issue. I absolutely, grassland renewal. So with tillage, avoid that and try to overseed. That would be the proper way to do it. Okay, I think that's it. I hope I answered the questions. Otherwise, you can use your voice.
Perfect. Yeah, if there are any further questions, just unmute yourself or send a message later. I will try to forward your questions later. What about breeding tolerant species? There's one more question.
Breeding tolerant species in sense of what? So breeding of plants in general against so for drought tolerance. There is also potential there, but I think that Europe is way too focused with breeding on perennial ryegrass, and there's not so much potential in perennial ryegrass. You could also start a selection on perennial ryegrass with a focus of drought tolerance, but I'm not sure if this is the smart way to go because you already have species which are much more drought tolerant and have more potential. So one strategy which some farmers think about, which might make sense, especially in areas where usually is enough precipitation, try to get your perennial ryegrass to more and more earlier heading dates. So you can shift with an earlier spring, you can shift your first mowing, your first cut, your first grazing to an earlier point and have a longer spring where there is enough soil moisture to grow. So this is one part I could think about when looking at perennial ryegrass, but in general, I would look at other species.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 5 minutes over time. The question, what are measures for climate adaptation and mitigation on grassland farmers in your area implementing, is in the chat. Just go on menti.com and put in the code 35206218. Just answer the questions if you have time. That would be amazing. And other than that, I will Thank you, Kilian, for your very good input. I hope everybody takes something home from them, and the recording will be available soon on YouTube to rewatch the webinar or forward it to your colleagues. Okay, well, then I just see, I don't think we can still answer on Menti. I will just open the room on Menti and then let you answer. Everybody who has to leave now, thank you very much for participating. And Kilian, again to you, thank you very much for your input.
Yeah, thank you for listening.